The letter arrived on a Wednesday morning, though neither the postman nor the neighbors remembered delivering it. It was thick, yellowed parchment sealed with a smear of blood-red wax. The envelope carried no stamp, no return address, only the names, Ed and Lorraine Warren, scrawled in a rushed, near-panicked hand. Lorraine held it for several long seconds before daring to break the seal. As she unfolded the letter, a chill flooded the room, the air turning stale. Even the crucifix on the living room wall seemed to tilt slightly to the left, as though recoiling from what was coming. "Ed," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "it's happening again." Ed looked up from the radio he was tinkering with. Though his hair had thinned and his back ached more often than not, there was a sharpness in his eyes that never dulled. He reached for the letter, reading aloud. "Please. My family is not safe. They took the priest. My daughter says she sees them crawling on the ceiling. It knows your names. It said you're next. Please. We're at 36 Hollow Vale. Hurry. E. Grayson." There was no date. No phone number. Just desperation. Lorraine already had her rosary in hand. This feels different." Ed nodded grimly. "Then let's make sure it's our last. Hollow Vale, Rhode Island, 8:43 p.m. The road to the Grayson home was barely a road at all, more like a dirt path choking its way through the dense woods. Trees lined both sides, gnarled and leaning, like they were whispering to one another about what was to come. Lightning pulsed in the sky, lighting up twisted branches that seemed to claw toward the windshield. Lorraine hadn't said a word in over 30 minutes. "You feel it too, don't you?" Ed asked. Her voice was brittle. "Something's watching. Not just from the house. From everywhere." The Grayson home was a faded two-story colonial nestled at the edge of the woods. It looked innocent in the flickering headlights, quaint, almost cozy. But the front door was wide open. And the house was breathing. They could hear it, the slow, rasping inhale, like a beast slumbering just under the floorboards. Inside, the air was wrong. Too thick. Too still. The wallpaper was peeling, soaked through as if the walls themselves had been sweating. Shadows didn't stay still, they twitched when you looked away, and the silence had a pulse. "Hello?" Ed called out. His voice echoed as though the house had swallowed it whole. From upstairs came a slow creaking, footsteps. Lorraine gripped his arm. "Ed, wait." He paused. Her eyes widened, shimmering with that unmistakable look, her psychic sense flaring. "There's more than one entity here. At least, 3. One pretends to be human. One hates light. And the third." She stopped. Her breath hitched. "The third is wearing someone's skin." In the living room, they found a young girl, maybe 10, curled in the corner behind the couch. She rocked back and forth, whispering to herself. Her eyes were bloodshot and unfocused. Lorraine crouched beside her gently. "Sweetheart, it's okay. We're here to help." The girl's lips moved, but her voice sounded like it came from 100 feet beneath the floor. "They're in the walls. Daddy tried to burn it. But it screamed like Mommy." Ed scanned the room. A scorched black circle marked the floor beneath the coffee table, salt, ash, and hair. At the center lay a priest's collar, half melted into the floorboards. He picked it up with gloved fingers. "Father O'Connor," he said grimly. This was his last assignment. Lorraine whispered a prayer. They found Mrs. Grayson in the basement, chained to the support beam with rosary beads knotted around her wrists and ankles. She didn't speak. Her eyes were gone, burned black like they had boiled inside her skull. Yet she was still breathing. The word sacrifice had been carved into her stomach with what looked like fingernails. Ed stepped back. "Christ." "No," Lorraine corrected. "Not Christ. Something older." From the far end of the basement, a voice giggled. Then it said in a hoarse, childlike tone. She gave birth to me in the dark. A face appeared, upside down, crawling down from the basement ceiling. It was a human child's head stitched crudely to a too-thin neck, its mouth too wide and lips split at the corners. The creature blinked. Do you want to see where Daddy lives now? Then it vanished into the darkness behind the furnace. Ed raised his crucifix, heart thudding. Lorraine closed her eyes and reached out with her mind. Her psychic sense flared open like an unhealed wound. She saw blood-soaked pews, screaming mouths stitched shut, a funeral that never ended. And above it all, a black, wingless figure with no face. It wore a priest's robe soaked in bile. It moved like a shadow trying to mimic life. Every step left rot on the floor. It didn't walk. It glided. Its name burned into Lorraine's mind like acid. Malphas. A high demon. A corrupter of the holy. Known in forbidden texts as the cleric of the flesh. He's still here, Lorraine gasped. And he's not alone. Later, in the attic, they found the altar. It was made of bones, human bones, and doll parts, arranged in a grotesque mockery of a chapel. A baby monitor sat on the center of the altar, powered but unplugged. It crackled with static. Then a voice rasped from it. Confess, or burn. The attic door slammed shut behind them. The temperature dropped to freezing. Breath misted. Suddenly, the walls began to bleed, thick black ooze, pouring from the wooden beams, coating the floors. A dozen crucifixes mounted on the walls spun upside down in perfect unison. Lorraine dropped to her knees, clutching her rosary. She whispered, Saint Michael, defend us in battle. A force hurled her across the attic, slamming her into a wall. Ed ran to her, only to feel something yank his legs out from under him. He hit the ground hard, barely managing to keep hold of the crucifix. A scream erupted from the baby monitor, inhuman, metallic, and far too deep to come from a child. Then, silence. A voice whispered beside Lorraine's ear. You should not have come here. They escaped the attic. For now. Back in the kitchen, Lorraine sat trembling. Her hands were shaking too much to pour water. Ed steadied her. This demon, she said, he's not tormenting them for revenge. He's feeding. Off the family. Off their faith. Their fear. And now, us. Ed's jaw tensed. We've faced worse. No, Ed, she said, looking at him with tears in her eyes. This one's different. He doesn't want to kill them. He wants to turn them. She looked down the hallway toward the basement door. It had crept open again. The stairs beyond were pitch black. Lorraine whispered, he's building a church. They checked the father's study. Dozens of pages were scattered on the floor, frantic scrawls, Latin incantations, drawings of clawed figures with hollow eyes. One word appeared over and over in his journal. Rites. But not last rites. These were twisted ones. Blood rites. Binding rites. Rites of transformation. As they began preparing for the exorcism, Lorraine paused at the window. Something moved outside, something tall, hunched, with limbs too long. It watched the house with interest, then turned and vanished into the trees. Ed. I saw it too. Thunder cracked. The crucifix in the hallway snapped in half. And from the back of the house, the young girl screamed. They found her in the bathroom, hunched over the bathtub. She was carving symbols into her own arms, humming a lullaby in a dead language. Her eyes were rolled back. Ed grabbed her, holding her down while Lorraine tried to reach her mind. For a split second, she connected, and saw what the girl saw. A cathedral of corpses. A crown of screaming faces. An altar that bled into the sky. And above it all, Malphas. smiling. The moment broke when the mirror shattered on its own, spraying glass in every direction. A voice screamed from inside the mirror. "I am the last Rite." Back downstairs, Ed and Lorraine looked at each other. They were older. Tired. But this wasn't just another case. This was the end. And something knew it. The house was quieter now. Too quiet. Lorraine stood in the kitchen, her fingers twitching as she placed a hand on the cold, greasy counter. The faint smell of something decaying lingered in the air, like wet earth and iron. She could feel it in her chest. That weight. The suffocating pressure of something far older than the house itself. Something that wasn't ready to leave. Ed stood by the door, staring down at the pages of the journal they had found in the father's study. He'd been scanning them for hours, piecing together the last bits of a puzzle that didn't make sense. He could see the terror in the father's eyes, the desperation in every frantic sentence, but the words weren't adding up. Something was missing. Something important. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, flipping another page. The journal was filled with a chaotic mix of Latin passages, cryptic drawings, and disturbing symbols. At the center of it all was one name. Repeated over and over. Malphas. Lorraine stepped toward him, her eyes scanning the journal's contents as well. She could feel a migraine starting to form, an invisible weight pressing against her skull. This isn't just an exorcism. It's a ritual. A series of rites, each one meant to bind this demon to the living. Ed's voice was rough, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "Yeah, but they're incomplete. The ritual hasn't been finished, and it's been interrupted too many times." She looked at him, dread beginning to stir in her stomach. "It's trying to finish it. And if it does?" Ed's eyes met hers. "We're looking at a full possession. Not just of the family, but of this entire house. Of everything inside." The clock on the wall above them ticked, louder and louder until it seemed to echo in their bones. Lorraine felt something stir in the shadows just beyond the threshold of the kitchen. Something watching them. It was watching them all. Upstairs, Edie Grayson was pacing. Her bare feet slapped against the hardwood floor as she nervously bit her lip, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread creeping down her spine. She hadn't seen the demon yet, not like the others, but she could feel its presence. It was close. The house had always been unsettling, but tonight, it felt like it was closing in on her, suffocating her with its dark, twisted energy. It wasn't just the house that was changing. It was her too. The whispers had started again. At first, they were soft, like distant voices, muffled through a thick wall. But now, they were louder. Closer. As though something was screaming just beneath the floorboards. Then, she heard it. A faint scratching sound. It started at the back of the closet door, just out of sight, but it moved toward her. Slowly, scraping its nails against the wood. The room seemed to close in around her as the sound grew louder. More desperate. And then. A hand. A pale, long-fingered hand with jagged nails appeared beneath the crack of the door. Edie screamed. The door slammed open, throwing her backward into the wall, knocking the breath out of her. A gust of freezing air swept through the room, rattling the windows. She couldn't move. Her body was paralyzed as she stared in horror. The figure that emerged from the darkness wasn't human. Its skin was stretched too thin, tattered, raw, like it had been skinned alive. Its eyes were wide and empty, black holes where life once existed, and its lips were pulled back in a grotesque, frozen grin. And it wasn't alone. Behind it, another figure emerged. This one was smaller, hunched, crawling on all fours. Its mouth gaped open as it let out a high-pitched, shrill laugh, one that made Edie's blood run cold. Then the whispers stopped. And in the silence that followed, Edie heard a voice, not from the figures, but from the air itself. It was deep, guttural, vibrating through the walls. "She's mine now." Lorraine and Ed were already on their way up when they heard Edie's scream. Ed pushed the door open, only to find it empty. No Edie. No monsters. Just the faint trace of her perfume lingering in the air. "She was here," Lorraine whispered, her breath coming out in short bursts. "Something's pulling her away." Ed took her hand, his eyes scanning the hallway. "We have to act fast. Whatever this thing is, it's moving quicker than we thought." Downstairs, Edie was no longer alone. She floated. Not in the air, but in some kind of suspension, trapped in a web of darkness. Her body was twisted, her arms pinned to her sides, her legs bound by invisible ropes. She couldn't move, couldn't scream. The air around her crackled with static. The figures were closer now, those twisted creatures with their skin pulled tight against their bones, grinning like predators. One of them spoke, its voice guttural and mocking. "You think they'll save you? You're angels. They are weak. You will be ours. Forever." Edie tried to scream again, but her mouth was sealed shut, as though the air itself had taken it. Her eyes darted to the wall, desperate for some kind of escape, and that's when she saw it. A symbol. A sigil carved into the wall in dark, deep grooves. Blood trickled from the edges, and it burned with a light that was both repelling and seductive. It was a familiar symbol, one Ed and Lorraine had seen before in the darkest of rituals. This was no ordinary possession. This was something far worse. A summoning. Edie's breath caught in her throat. The figures were closing in. She felt her body slowly, agonizingly, begin to shift, to change, as though the demon was pulling her into its grasp, trying to twist her into something unrecognizable. Then the door behind her burst open. Ed and Lorraine rushed in. Lorraine immediately knelt beside Edie, her hands reaching for the girl's head, her fingers trembling as they brushed against her temple. The energy in the room was suffocating. The air smelled like sulfur, like something long dead and forgotten. "Ed," Lorraine whispered, her voice strained, "she's too far gone. It's already started. The demon has begun its work." Ed grabbed the holy water from his pack, splashing it onto the floor, onto the walls, anything to stop the infestation. He whispered a prayer under his breath, his hands shaking with every word. But nothing was happening. The sigil on the wall glowed brighter. And then, the floor beneath them cracked. The earth groaned. Something was rising. A voice screamed from the pit beneath them. "I am the end." The floor ruptured beneath their feet like brittle bone. From the jagged opening in the earth came a blast of heat and a wave of foul air, the scent of rot and scorched flesh curling through the room. The sigil on the wall flared violently, pulsing with an unnatural rhythm, a heartbeat that didn't belong to anyone living. Lorraine clutched Edie's trembling body, praying beneath her breath even as her own hands shook. Ed braced himself as the ground trembled again. A deep growl erupted from the chasm below. It was not just a sound, it was a presence, something rising from a place no light should ever reach. The voice that followed made Lorraine's soul recoil. "She is the flesh. You are the offering." Then, it emerged. A figure, no, an abomination, began clawing its way up from the hole, dragging with it a trail of dripping black sludge. It had no face, just a slit where its mouth should be, wide and stitched shut with wire. Its body was made of others. Arms, legs, torsos fused grotesquely, stitched together like butcher's meat. It dripped with bile and blood, twitching with every movement. Lorraine gasped. Malphas. The demon stood fully upright now, towering over them. Where its heart should have been was a pulsing, open eye, unblinking, oozing, staring straight into Lorraine's soul. Ed stepped in front of her, crucifix raised high. "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." Malphas didn't flinch. Instead, it opened its stitched mouth, and a swarm of flies spewed forth, choking the air with the buzzing of decay. Ed stumbled back, coughing, his eyes watering. Lorraine screamed, "Ed!" But the demon didn't attack. It turned, and looked at Edie. She had risen. But she was no longer entirely herself. Edie's body jerked forward in unnatural spasms, as if invisible marionette strings yanked her limbs. Her mouth opened, but her voice had changed, deeper, distorted, inhuman. The rites have begun. One soul. One sacrifice. One flesh. Her eyes rolled back, revealing only milky whites. Her veins pulsed black beneath her skin. Lorraine reached for her, but a blast of invisible force knocked her backward, slamming her into the wall. Edie collapsed to the ground, convulsing violently. Ed rushed to her side. "Edie! Stay with me. Fight it." But she was slipping. Her body arched upward, her limbs rising off the ground as blood seeped from her nose, her ears, her mouth. Lorraine's voice cracked as she grabbed her rosary and shouted, "Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle." But the words turned to static in the air, as though the house itself had rejected the prayer. Suddenly, the lights in the house exploded. The bulbs burst one after another, raining shards of glass like snow. The walls began to pulse, like lungs, breathing in and out in slow, labored motions. And then, from somewhere deep inside the structure, a scream tore through the halls. It wasn't just a scream of pain. It was a scream of birth. The demon was not only possessing, it was creating. Edie's convulsions ceased. She lay still. Then, she opened her eyes. And smiled. Not the smile of a person who had survived. But the slow, delighted grin of something inhuman wearing a human face. Lorraine saw it immediately. That's not Edie anymore. The thing wearing her skin stood. Its voice came out hollow, layered, like dozens speaking at once through her mouth. "I've taken her body. Now I will take her blood. And with that, the final rite will be complete." Ed raised his crucifix again. "You're not taking her anywhere." The thing that was Edie tilted its head. "You cannot stop what was promised before your God ever took his first breath." It raised its hand. The sigil on the wall burned. A gash opened down Lorraine's arm as if an invisible blade had sliced her. She fell to the ground, clutching the wound, her blood pooling at her side. Her vision blurred. She could feel her strength draining. Not from blood loss, but from something feeding off her. Malphas stepped closer. His voice seeped from every crack in the walls, every creaking floorboard, every whispering shadow. "This is not an exorcism. This is a rebirth." Ed fumbled for the flask of holy water in his bag. His hand shook as he drew it out and hurled it at the creature wearing Edie's skin. The water struck her face, and for the first time, it sizzled. She shrieked in rage, her head snapping violently to the side, steam rising from her cheeks as the water burned into her. "Ed! More!" Lorraine cried. But the floor erupted again, hands began to emerge from the cracked wood. Pale, twitching, malformed human arms, clawing their way upward. Some were old. Some infant-sized. All wrong. The house was birthing bodies. Lorraine realized then what was happening. The rites. They're building him a congregation. Ed froze. "You mean? They're not just meant to bind him. They're meant to multiply him." Every soul consumed is reshaped into one of his apostles. Lorraine pushed herself up. "We have to sever the rite. We have to destroy the sigil." But the sigil had begun to bleed, dark, thick sludge running down the wall like tar. Faces writhed inside it. Whispering. Begging. Screaming. Ed grabbed the iron poker from the fireplace and ran at the wall. He plunged it into the center of the sigil. A flash of light. A howl unlike anything they'd ever heard. The room exploded in darkness. When Lorraine came to, she was in the hallway. The house had changed. It was no longer the Grayson home. The wallpaper had been replaced by something like skin, stitched in uneven lines across the walls. The chandelier above dripped blood instead of light. She stood shakily. Ed? Edie? No answer. Then she heard singing. A child's voice. Coming from the nursery. She opened the door. The crib sat in the center of the room. A baby lay inside, swaddled in black cloth. It cooed softly. But as Lorraine stepped closer, her breath caught. The baby didn't have a face. Just smooth skin, with an open mouth in the center of its chest. Then it sang again. In Latin. And as it did, the walls bled scripture in long, black veins. Lorraine stumbled back, horrified. Then a whisper behind her. You were never meant to leave this place. Lorraine turned. And saw herself. Another Lorraine. Mouth stitched shut. Eyes weeping blood. Smiling. Lorraine's scream echoed through the nursery, bouncing off the stitched skin walls like a ricochet of her own terror. The other Lorraine stood across from her, a grotesque twin, silent, unmoving. Her eyes wept thick, tar-like blood, and her jaw pulsated behind a sewn mouth that begged to split open. For one sickening moment, Lorraine couldn't move. Her body trembled, her brain torn between flight and collapse. She had faced demons before. Monsters. Lost souls. But this? This was her. Twisted. Broken. Prepared. The faceless baby cooed again in its crib, its lullaby transforming into a prayer. But not one to God. No, this was a hymn to something else. Something far beneath the veil of divinity. And the room listened. The other Lorraine began to walk forward, each step accompanied by the low, grinding sound of bone against wood. Her bare feet left blood where they touched. Her stitched lips curled into a horrific half-smile, one that spoke of mockery and death in equal measure. Lorraine reached for her crucifix and choked back nausea. The mirror above the crib cracked down the center. In its reflection, there were not two Lorraines, but dozens, all surrounding her, their mouths sewn, their eyes hollow, waiting. They were all versions of herself. All sacrificed. Suddenly, the air shifted, a voice cut through the room, and Lorraine dropped to her knees in pain. She walked through the veil, and now the veil wears her face. The whisper came from inside her mind, from within her own bones. Her rosary tightened in her hand, biting into her palm as she muttered the Our Father through gritted teeth. Our Father, who art in heaven. The false Lorraines hissed. The baby in the crib screamed, its mouth stretching wider, the skin splitting down its chest until it tore open into a gaping black void. Hallowed be thy. Light exploded from Lorraine's crucifix. It flashed white-hot, searing the air. The stitched faces wailed and burst like paper set aflame. The real Lorraine surged to her feet and staggered for the door, but the nursery had disappeared. Now, she was in the chapel. Except it wasn't a chapel anymore. It was a cathedral of bones. Every pew had been replaced by spines and skulls. The altar was made of ribcages lashed together with barbed wire. Candles burned black with flames that hissed and whispered secrets. And above it all, looming, crucified upside down, was Father O'Connor. His eyes were gone, gouged clean. His chest had been carved open and filled with pages from a blasphemous Bible, stitched into his flesh. His fingers twitched. He was still alive. Lorraine backed away, gasping. And that's when she saw Ed. At the far end of the altar, chained, bleeding, on his knees. Lorraine, his voice was raw, barely audible. Don't let it take you too. She ran to him, dropping to her knees, fumbling with the chains. His wrists were bound by something not metal, but living, twitching black tendrils. That hissed as she touched them. Then came the footsteps. From behind the altar. Malphas. In full form. No longer hiding in shadows or mirrors. He stood 12 feet tall, wings not of feathers but flesh, dripping with faces of the dead, and wearing a robe stitched from cassocks soaked in holy oil and ash. Where his face should have been was a mirror, reflecting not her image, but every sin she'd ever buried. Every failure. Every scream. Every child she couldn't save. Every soul she failed to deliver from evil. He raised one clawed hand and the chapel trembled. You came here thinking you were holy. He stepped closer. But saints bleed like sinners. Lorraine's hands burned as she held on to Ed's chains. Malphas spoke again, but this time, not through words. Through her blood. She saw visions. Edie chained in the house's foundations, her body cracking open, her eyes gone, her voice replaced by Latin psalms. The Grayson family, all 5 of them, kneeling in a circle beneath the basement, their mouths sewn, their chests hollowed out to hold relics, twisted vessels for Malphas's gospel. Children, hundreds of them, crying in pews built of jawbones, wearing communion veils stained red. Each image branded her soul. Lorraine screamed. Ed groaned, trying to stand. Lorraine, don't listen to it. It's trying to bury you. She looked at him, and realized he had already been marked. Carved into his chest, just above his heart, was the 3rd rite. 3 symbols. 1 for flesh. 1 for faith. 1 for failure. Lorraine understood now. The house wasn't haunted. It was an altar. Every room a sanctified piece of a demonic ceremony. And they were the final offering. Suddenly, a light. Bright. Pure. Bursting through the cracks in the chapel ceiling. A shaft of golden light pierced through the bones, slashing across the altar, and Malphas reeled, his mirror face cracking. Lorraine looked up. And saw a vision. A young girl, maybe 7, standing barefoot in the beam of light. Her eyes shone like sunlight on water. Lorraine's voice caught. Sophia. The girl said nothing. But her hand raised, pointing directly at Malphas. And then, Lorraine remembered, Sophia. The little girl from the Amityville case. The one she couldn't save. The one who burned alive in her bed. But Sophia had come back. To protect. To warn. Lorraine stood, strength flowing back into her limbs. Her crucifix pulsed hot in her palm. She grabbed Ed's hand. I'm not letting him have you. Ed nodded, blood trickling from his temple. Then finish it. Together, they turned to Malphas, who screeched in rage, slamming his claw into the altar. The bone cathedral shook. The ribs cracked. The pews screamed. Lorraine held her rosary high. In the name of Jesus Christ, I cast you out. Malphas charged. In the name of the blood that was spilled for our salvation, I bind you. He roared, wings snapping open, faces screaming in agony. In the name of the Holy Spirit, I end this rite. The golden light erupted. The floor shattered. Malphas's body split open, and from within poured thousands of insects, bones, mouths, eyes, souls. The sound was deafening. Like a choir of the damned being set on fire. Then. Silence. Darkness fell. The chapel faded. Lorraine awoke lying on the living room floor of the Grayson house. It was morning. Light filtered gently through the dusty windows. Ed was beside her. Breathing. The sigils were gone. The blood had dried to dust. The house was empty. But not all was well. Lorraine sat up slowly, looking around. No Graysons. No Edie. No bodies. Just silence. She looked at Ed. We ended the rite, she said quietly. Ed nodded. But did we end him? On the wall above the fireplace, carved deep into the wood. The last rite is still to come. The sunrise cast a ghostly glow through the broken panes of the Grayson house. Dust floated like ash, and the silence felt wrong, thick, like breathing through wool. Lorraine sat on the floor beside Ed, her hand clutching his. They were alive. But the air, it hummed. A resonance. Like a song sung backward beneath the surface of the world. Ed stood, unsteady but breathing. We need to call the church. Get this place sealed. Burned. Condemned. Lorraine shook her head slowly. No. She could still feel it. Malphas. Not defeated, dormant. Sleeping beneath the veil. Watching. Waiting. And then, she heard the softest noise, a knock. Coming from the basement door. Tap. 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 3 knocks. The third rite. Ed turned sharply. Tell me that's the wind. Lorraine didn't answer. Because she knew. That wasn't the wind. It was Edie. They descended the stairs slowly, each creak of the wood like a scream in their ears. The basement smelled of rot and something far worse, old faith. The stench of desecration. The flickering flashlight cast long, broken shadows along the stone walls. What had once been a wine cellar was now a crypt of symbols, carved in blood and bone. Crosses twisted upside down. Crucifixes nailed to each other. The Grayson family Bible, its pages torn, rewritten with unholy scripture. And there, at the far wall, was a mirror. Not just any mirror. It was the veil. A 6-foot-tall pane of black glass, surrounded by bone totems and burned candles. It pulsed like skin stretched over something moving beneath. The surface shimmered, showing not reflections, but visions. And in its depths, they saw her. Edie. She stood motionless, facing them, her eyes completely black, her nightgown scorched and torn. Her mouth moved, but no sound came. Her body was submerged halfway through the mirror, as if being absorbed into it. Lorraine gasped, rushing toward it. Edie. Hold on. We're here. Ed grabbed her. Lorraine, no. That's not her anymore. But Edie lifted a hand. And from within the mirror, a single word whispered in both their minds. Help. The mirror's surface began to ripple. And then, split open. A black hand reached out. Skeletal. Clawed. Covered in what looked like holy symbols etched into its skin and burning. It grasped the floor, pulling something through. Malphas. Not his full form this time, but a gatekeeper. A fragment of the entity, crawling through the veil like a spider shedding skin. Its head was a child's skull fused with a demon's jaw. Its voice was layered, hundreds of voices crying out at once. The third rite is not complete. It slithered closer, dragging chains behind it. Chained to souls, the Graysons. All of them. Hanging like marionettes. Eyes sewn shut. Lips pulled back into eternal grins. Ed shouted, raising the crucifix. Back. In the name of God. Malphas's fragment lunged, and bit into the cross, cracking it. The light died. The veil sucked them in. They woke in the other world. It was not hell. It was not earth. It was between. A landscape of endless ruin, made of shattered churches and floating altars. Crucified angels screamed silently in the sky. Black rivers flowed uphill. Time did not exist here, only the rite. Lorraine and Ed stood in the center of a broken cathedral where gravity bowed to faith. The pulpit twisted into a spiral. Hymns played in reverse over the wind. Saints carved from flesh wept acid. And at the center, high upon a throne of bloodied organs, sat Malphas in full glory. Towering. Infinite. Wearing the faces of priests, children, mothers, sinners. His wings stretched wide, forming the walls of the world. And in his grasp, Edie. Her body hovered like a sacrificial lamb. A glowing sigil burned across her chest. Lorraine screamed. Let her go. The final rite must be fulfilled, the voice boomed from everywhere. 3 must be offered. 1 in body. 1 in faith. 1 in failure. Ed fell to his knees. No. No. Not her. Malphas gestured. You brought her here. She belongs to the right now. But you can choose who takes her place. And then, 3 mirrors appeared. One showed Lorraine holding Edie as a baby, smiling. One showed Ed walking away from the church, weeping. One showed Lorraine at Amityville, watching a house burn as a child screamed inside. Each mirror cracked. The right demanded a replacement. Ed looked at Lorraine. It wants us. Lorraine's voice broke. We can't let it take her. Malphas raised a hand. Then choose. 1 gives the body. 1 gives the faith. 1 gives the failure. Lorraine stepped forward. I give my faith. Ed stood. I give my body. And then, from behind, Edie whispered. I give the failure. The mirrors shattered. A storm of souls burst from Malphas, shrieking like fire-given voice. The world split down the center. The cathedral collapsed into a whirlpool of light and blood. And suddenly, everything went white. Lorraine awoke. On the ground. In the Grayson basement. Ed beside her. Edie, alive. Breathing. Crying. Human. The mirror was gone. The veil had vanished. The symbols were burned away. Only ash remained. They climbed out of the basement as dawn broke again, this time, real and holy. The house was silent. No voices. No screams. The Graysons were gone. Their souls freed, or taken. Edie clung to Lorraine's leg, sobbing. I saw everything. I saw what hell looks like. Lorraine hugged her tight. It's over now, sweetheart. You're safe. But as they turned to leave, Lorraine felt a prickling in her mind. A whisper. Faint. Familiar. Not Malphas. Her own voice. From the other world. The last rite is still to come. She looked up at the wall. And there it was again. Newly carved in flesh. The last rite is you. The Warrens had been through countless battles, possession, hauntings, demons masquerading as angels, and houses that breathed like living beasts. But nothing prepared them for what came after. After the veil shattered. After Malphas retreated. After the Graysons' house was cleansed. Because evil doesn't die. It waits. It had been 3 days since the events in the Grayson house. Ed and Lorraine stayed in a motel outside of New Haven, hoping to recuperate. But rest never came. Lorraine woke up screaming each night, whispering words she didn't understand. Speaking in Latin. Sometimes Aramaic. And Ed? He stopped sleeping altogether. He stared into mirrors. All mirrors. Even ones that weren't there. He would sit up in bed, eyes bloodshot, whispering, I see them. Behind the glass. Lorraine feared he hadn't returned from the other world completely. On the 4th night, Ed collapsed. Not fainted. Collapsed. His body jerked violently. Blood streamed from his nose, his ears. His mouth moved but emitted no sound. Then suddenly, his limbs bent in unnatural angles. Crack. Pop snap. His spine twisted so hard his torso spun to face Lorraine while his legs stayed fixed. And then, he screamed. Not in pain. But in a voice not his own. The last rite begins with blood. Lorraine watched in horror as a burned hand reached from Ed's throat and tried to crawl out. She grabbed the crucifix and screamed, pressing it to his chest. Smoke hissed from his skin. Ed's body seized, and then went limp. When he woke up moments later, he remembered none of it. But Lorraine did. And so did the walls. They were now bleeding. They sought the church. Father Reynolds, a retired exorcist from the Amityville case, met them in an abandoned chapel just outside Bridgeport. He had aged significantly since they last saw him. He greeted them with a frail voice and cloudy eyes. "You shouldn't have opened the veil," he said to Lorraine. "We didn't open it," she whispered. "It opened itself. It knew us. It was, waiting." He shook his head. "No. It was invited. And now that Malphas has tasted your soul, he wants the rest." Ed sat silently, barely blinking. Father Reynolds brought out a scroll, ancient, wrapped in red wax, smelling of burnt roses and iron. "This is the rite of severance. The only known counter to the last rite. But it comes at a cost." Lorraine frowned. "What cost?" He unwrapped the scroll. And pointed. A line scrawled in blackened ink. "To sever the bond, the sacred must be torn from the flesh." She recoiled. "It's not metaphorical," he explained. "One of you must be willingly flayed, skin-bearing faith removed, and burned. Only then can the bond be broken." They drove in silence. Rain splattered against the windshield like bones dropping from a great height. Ed finally spoke. "I'll do it." Lorraine gripped the wheel. "No." He looked at her, tired. "I have less time." His hands had begun cracking. The skin peeling away like scorched paper. He hid it from her, but she noticed. Malphas was already feeding on him. They returned to the Grayson house, now hollowed and condemned. The foundation still held, but the walls felt alive, as though watching. In the basement, the burned mirror had been replaced. Not physically. But spiritually. Lorraine could feel it. A portal still pulsed in the air, invisible but present. Like a heartbeat behind thin skin. Father Reynolds prepared the rite. Candles, relics, chants from dead languages. Lorraine wept as Ed removed his shirt. Across his back was the sigil of Saint Michael, tattooed years ago during a Vatican blessing. It had to be cut away. She kissed his forehead. He nodded. Then screamed. As Father Reynolds carved the sacred flesh from Ed's back, inch by inch, Ed trembled, vomited, and bled. But he never begged for it to stop. The moment the final strip of flesh was removed, and dropped into the iron bowl, the walls screamed. Not metaphor. They screamed. Every plank, every nail, every inch of this cursed place shrieked like a dying beast. The veil reappeared. Not as a mirror. But as a hole. A dark circle carved into reality, throbbing and dripping. And from within it, stepped Malphas. Fully formed. Twice as tall as a man. Wings of glass and rusted nails. Mouths layered across his chest. In place of eyes, he wore wedding rings, symbols of the sacred union he hated most. Ed fell to the floor. Malphas raised a finger, pointing at Lorraine. "You still have faith. The rite is not complete." Father Reynolds hurled holy water. It turned to flies midair. Malphas snapped his fingers, and the priest's spine exploded from his chest. He collapsed, dead. Lorraine grabbed the bowl of burning flesh and threw it at the demon. It howled, body erupting into steaming holes. But it didn't fall. Instead, it laughed. And from its mouth, it coughed up a baby doll, cracked and blackened, still whispering. "Mama." The house began to collapse. Ed crawled toward Lorraine. "Run. Lorraine, please." But she didn't. She stepped forward. Toward Malfa's. Her rosary in one hand. A sharpened crucifix in the other. She screamed the litany of the saints. "Saint Michael, defend us. Saint Benedict, protect us. Mother Mary, guide us." Malthus shrieked, his form fracturing, splitting open into 1,000 wailing spirits. Lorraine stabbed the crucifix into his core. There was a blinding flash. And then. Darkness. She awoke outside. In the rain. The Grayson house was gone. Not burned. Gone. Only the concrete slab remained. Ed was lying next to her, unconscious, but alive. No wounds. No sigil. The bond, severed. But Lorraine stared into the sky. The clouds weren't moving. Not even a breeze. Time had stopped. And then she heard it again. Her own voice. Inside her head. "The final rite was never yours to complete." Suddenly. Edie appeared. She was older. Wearing a priest's cassock. Eyes glowing white. And behind her, an army of mirrors rose from the earth, each showing a different version of Ed and Lorraine's past sins. One with their daughter screaming. One with a failed exorcism. One with Lorraine standing silently as a girl drowned. Each version ended with the same message etched across the glass. "You were always part of the rite." Lorraine screamed into the void. And it screamed back. The veil wasn't closed. Malfa's wasn't gone. The rite had just fed. And the flesh had only been the appetizer. The final course was still to come. It was never about saving souls. It was about preparing them. 1 week later. The world had not been the same since the night the Grayson house vanished. People whispered of strange occurrences. Clocks stalling at 3:33 a.m. Entire churches emptying overnight. Priests found hanged, their mouths stitched shut with rosary beads. Infants born without pupils. Rain falling upward in small towns. And in the center of it all, 2 names began surfacing across police reports, exorcism logs, and secret Vatican memos. Ed and Lorraine Warren. Ed hadn't spoken in days. He simply sat in their dim motel room, hands trembling, staring at the Bible like it was written in another language. Lorraine kept seeing the girl. Edie. Only now she was in mirrors, walls, water, and sometimes in Lorraine's own shadow. She spoke only once, her voice layered with thousands. The final rite begins where faith ends. Lorraine knew where they had to go. The chapel beneath the dirt. There was one place no one dared touch. An underground church buried in the cursed woods outside Bridgeport, sealed in 1746 after 13 priests were found crucified upside down, their tongues replaced with shards of mirror. Locals called it the chapel beneath the dirt. It had no door. No windows. Only a slit in the soil, wide enough for a soul to slip through. They arrived just before midnight. Lorraine lit a single candle. Ed followed her without a word, moving like something inside him had already died. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough to crawl through. The deeper they went, the colder it became. By the time they reached the bottom, everything was black. Even the light refused to breathe. The chapel wasn't made of wood or stone. It was made of skin. The walls pulsed with veins. Eyes opened and blinked across the altar. Mouths whispered verses from corrupted gospels. At the center stood Edie, fully formed. Not a child anymore. Not a soul at all. But the embodiment of the rite. Clothed in a priest's robe, stitched together from stolen sacraments and confession letters. In her hands, a crucifix inverted and rusted, dripping milk-white fluid from its tips. Behind her, the veil. No longer a mirror. Now a living gate, screaming open. "Welcome, Ed and Lorraine," Edie said. "The lamb and the thorn." Lorraine raised her rosary. "We banish you." But her voice failed. She tried again, but no words came out. Edie grinned. "There's no banishment when you agreed to the rite. Long ago." She pointed at Ed. His body convulsed, eyes rolled back, and suddenly, he floated. His back ripped open, revealing the sigil of Malphas, not carved, but grown from inside. The rite hadn't been severed. It had been absorbed. Lorraine screamed. "No, no, I burned it. I burned his faith." Edie laughed. "Exactly. You offered his faith to us. You completed the rite. And now, we feast." The floor split open. From beneath, a choir of flesh rose. Children with no faces. Priests with eyes in their mouths. Choir girls with their arms fused into wings of bone. All humming a corrupted version of Ave Maria. The liturgy of the damned. Ed's mouth opened, and a second, smaller face emerged from his throat. It began chanting in ancient Babylonian. The walls bled scripture. Lorraine knelt. Desperate. Crying. She reached for the holy book. But the pages turned to maggots. Every relic in her possession crumbled. Even her wedding ring, long her symbol of love and protection, melted into her skin, forming a chain around her wrist. "You thought you were chosen to stop the evil," Edie said. "You were chosen to deliver it." She raised the inverted crucifix. Ed floated higher, his arms outstretched in cruciform. His ribs burst open. Inside was a third heart, black, pulsing, covered in thorns. Lorraine screamed, but she couldn't move. "Let the world be reborn." And with that, Edie plunged the crucifix into Ed's heart. The veil erupted. A storm of souls, dead children, unborn demons, corrupted angels, spilled into the world. Outside, across Earth, mirrors shattered in every home. Smoke rose from Vatican City. A cathedral in France imploded. Every holy ground became cursed soil. And in the skies, an eclipse appeared, even though it was night. Time fractured. History bent. And the last rite was complete. The end of everything. Lorraine watched as Ed's body floated down, now hollow. His eyes were gone. His voice, nothing but wind. She cradled his corpse, whispering prayers no longer heard by God. Edie knelt beside her. "Don't mourn him. He was the altar." Lorraine looked up. "Then what am I?" Edie leaned close. And whispered. "You're the mother of what comes next." Lorraine's stomach twisted. She looked down. And saw her own belly moving. Not with life. But with something crawling inside. Hands. Claws. Teeth. Growing. Ready to be born. The final step in the last rite. Epilogue, the mirror world. Weeks later. The world is changed. Mirrors are outlawed. Churches are abandoned. The sun hasn't risen in 9 days. Lorraine Warren has vanished. But they say if you enter a house where the mirror still hangs, you might see her reflection. Holding a child. With no face. And beneath the glass. Your own reflection doesn't move. Because it's already left you. To join her. In the world behind. Where faith has no light. Where the last rite reigns. Forever. Candle the Conjuring, Last Rites Candle. The End.